Hi there, I'm Dr. Myrdalis Diaz-Ramirez, and this is the Design Your Physician Life podcast. Welcome to this episode brought to you by our Maxillary Mastermind, an exclusive mastermind for physician entrepreneurs. Today we have a very dear guest and friend of mine, Dr. Nilesh Patel. He's actually the Vice President of Medical Affairs at Boston Scientific for the section of Spinal Cord Stimulation. We have a great conversation with Dr. Patel about working for the private sector and preparing to be physicians who are the private equity. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Design Your Physician Life podcast, where you will get excited about being a physician, learn the tools that can help boost your success, and great tips from successful doctors. Join us to unlock the keys to an amazing physician life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Myrdalis Diaz-Ramirez.
Hey guys, we have today Nilesh Kumar Patel. Dr. Patel is not only a wonderful physician, he's also my personal friend, and I'm very proud to be his friend. This is one of the best gifts medicine can give you is friendships like this. And before we go to his little bio, I just want to thank him for his time here, and also to tell him how proud I am of his career and grateful for all the things that he does for our field of neuromodulation and pain management. Welcome, Dr. Patel.
It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Myrdalis. How are you doing?
So let's tell the audience a little bit about you before we just engage in this conversation. So Dr. Patel is a board-certified pain management and anesthesiologist physician. He is currently the Vice President of Medical Affairs for Neuromodulation at that little company called Boston Scientific. He completed his medical training in the United Kingdom. Then he did his anesthesiology residency at Case Western Reserve University, where he was chief resident. And he did his fellowship in pain management at the Cleveland Clinic Foundation, and he was also staff there. He's a national international lecturer. He has been teacher and mentor for many of us. He has worked at multiple universities, Cleveland Clinic, Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Mayo, University of Michigan. He has served in different societies, World Institute of Pain, American Pain Society, American Society of Interventional Pain Physicians. He is well published, and he obviously loves neuromodulation. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. One thing that he has been doing a lot of is that he's been involved in legislative, medical boards, and community initiatives that strongly promote the field of multidisciplinary and interventional pain medicine, because he believes that this is the best venue to deliver pain care and decrease opioid burden and associate overdose and deaths. So, where do we start here? Where do you think? Let's just start with the little Nilesh, young Nilesh, the one who decided to become a pain doctor. When was that?
That was back in 1975. My parents always told everyone that I was going to be a doctor, so there was no choice but to basically go into medicine. Ended up going to University of Wales, and at that time, the attraction really for Wales was rugby, and transitioning from high school to college, you have certain lessons that you learn. That was followed by me coming to the United States, going into Pittsburgh University, did a fellowship in endocrinology, followed by anesthesiology at Case Western, as you said, and then did finish my fellowship at Cleveland Clinic. And again, the transition from university to residency was a difficult one. And then the transition from residency and fellowship to real life and private practice was another little milestone. And each of these transitions has really taught me a fair amount. Happy to share some of those thoughts with you. And then from private practice into private equity, where the demands are very, very different. The cadence of doing things is different. And then finally from private equity to a Fortune 500 company such as Boston Scientific is yet another transition. So at each of these transitions, you learn things. You have to obviously prepare in order to get through these transitions. And we can talk about those as well. But basically, I've been more fortunate than what I really deserve in terms of personal, professional life, and my personal growth. Been a curious individual in my life, and it's the curiosity that's really favored my career more than anything else.
I think in medicine, many of us share that curiosity. We're very curious scientifically and in life in general. I want to know a little bit more about that transition between medical school and anesthesiology. It says that under your fellowship, you mentioned some difficulties there. So how did you choose the career path that took you eventually to pain management? And tell us about your difficulties and how you overcame them.
Yeah. So the reason for choosing anesthesiology was basically rooted in my desire to go back to England. At that time, back in the early 80s, only 3 specialties had full reciprocity, where you didn't have to go back to England and retrain. It was radiology, anesthesiology, and psychiatry, and I certainly wasn't prepared to read, X-rays and read into people's minds. So being an anesthesiologist was a natural fit, and the desire was to go straight from anesthesiology to critical care and then get back to England. But if you think about the transition, right, to go from your fellowship into private practice, there's certain things that fellowships train you. Fellowships train you to take care of patients, see a patient, evaluate the patient, make a plan, and then manage that patient, be it with procedures, be it medications, be it with other modalities that we typically use. But they do not prepare us and they actually also prepare you well for the exams and the boards, but they do not prepare you for business, and they do not prepare you for life. Those are not ACGME requirements. And in order to successfully transition from your fellowship or residency into the real world, there are certain basic skill sets that are prerequisites for you to succeed. And that was a little challenging, particularly as neither Cleveland Clinic nor Case Western actually prepared you for either one of those 2 issues that you typically face when you transition from a fellowship into actual real life medicine.
So tell us about that transition when you decided to become an anesthesiologist, and you mentioned that you had some difficulties there, some challenges, and how you overcame them.
Absolutely. No, there weren't really challenges except for choosing a career that really had to fit the politics of the day. There was not the intention to go into anesthesia. The intention was still to finish my internal medicine, diabetes fellowship, and then go back to England. But because there was only reciprocity with the anesthesiology, psychiatry, and radiology, I ended up choosing anesthesiology. The intention was always to be able to speak to patients, take care of them long-term, and pain management was a natural fit thereafter. But as I said earlier, to go from a fellowship or residency, which prepares you well for taking care of patients, making clinical plans, doing procedures, managing the complications, and doing so safely, as well preparing you for the fellowship exams and boards. Unfortunately, our field, and in fact, medicine in general, does not prepare doctors well for the challenges that we face in managing patients beyond just taking care of them clinically. Specifically, I'm talking about the lack of training that we have for managing a business. I believe that the chiropractors and the dentists do a much better job than we do. And it is for this reason that a podcast such as this one is very valuable, because it gives people some tools to be able to follow their entrepreneurial pursuits, to actually do well in business, while concurrently creating value for the community and for the patients, as well as their staff, and be able to put food on the table without having to worry about things that we really shouldn't be worried about.
Yeah, it's a similar experience, obviously, and I graduated around from my fellowship just over 20 years ago. never anything was mentioned. I believe that these days people are starting to talk about that a little bit more, especially in the last couple of years. But and especially I think after COVID, with the increase in burnout, trying to understand, rethink your career choices and how you can keep giving medical care that's effective, while at the same time taking care of yourself and being able to feed your family and not lose it. So it's when you change careers, and then like you were really wanting to be an endocrinologist, and then you ended up going into eventually pain management. You never really went back to England. Tell us how you got to Florida, where I met you. I met you as an interventional pain physician at a private practice.
Absolutely. No. So what happened was the intention was to bring my family from England to the U.S. They wanted to move to a warm place. So essentially, you're left with places like Nevada, Texas, California, Florida. And because of the proximity of England to Florida, the family picked Florida, and that's when I went out, got an MBA to know exactly how to run a business, followed by buying a couple of businesses that met some of the immigration criteria for a business visa for my family members, and essentially managed those businesses until they got here to the U.S. And then once they got their visas, etc., I handed the keys to each of these businesses to the family. So essentially, it was desire to take care of my family that really brought me to Florida. Otherwise, I was doing really well in Wisconsin and really enjoying my Wisconsin practice, which was a private practice.
Let's take a little detour here. Let's talk about this entrepreneurial adventure that you had there, because you were a physician. Many physicians say, "Oh, I cannot do this, I cannot do that." In your case, you got ready, right? You got your MBA, and you had the desire and the want of bringing your family, which is your why, right? You really wanted to make it work for them, and you decided to get these other businesses going, and there was no option. Those businesses didn't exist. That was the strategy that you had to bring them here. So can you tell us a little bit about those businesses, how you acquired them and how you maintained them while you were still doing pain management?
Yes. So it was to bring my family members, meaning my siblings from the UK. It's no different to buying any business. You basically find some brokers locally, knock on some doors, speak with lawyers who are well versed with this sort of visas, and then connect with different brokers, different businesses, go and evaluate the businesses, see if they meet the criteria. And in those days, you had to be able to hire 9 people, and the business had to be self-sufficient so that the immigrant does not become a burden to the state, and there's a certain amount that had to be invested at that time. So once those criteria were met, and the business had to be profitable, basically we looked at a number of businesses and landed on a hotel, landed on a manufacturing plant, and landed on a development company within the Southern Florida region. Bought each of these businesses, ran them. Actually, I stopped working as a physician for a couple of years. The initial guidance from these lawyers was that it'll take no more than 3 to 6 months to get the visas, but it actually took some 18 months, so couldn't have performed as a physician concurrently. So I literally had to take some time off. At that time, as I was transitioning, I also went back into consulting and consulted for the Cleveland Clinic for 2 years while I was managing these businesses concurrently. So gave up medicine in terms of my own practice in Wisconsin, which was very successful, but was still consulting, and then had kept my feet in the water within the field of pain management, albeit transiently. and albeit in a very different role. The role at the Cleveland Clinic was about growth and expansion and integration of certain acquisitions that the Cleveland Clinic had made in peripheral hospitals. In those days, Cleveland Clinic had a spoke and wheel model that it was toying with, acquiring hospitals and then expanding specialty services into those hospitals. So that was an interesting detour, but it really did train you in terms of how do you evaluate a business, how do you optimize a business. And those 2.5, maybe 3 years were also good for me in terms of personal growth and learning about challenges that all businesses face, including pain medicine business. And it really did open my eyes up, both the MBA as well as the consulting and as well as running these businesses. And this is where I think it would be worth sharing with your audience that that it's important to be able to take measured risks. It's also important to be prepared. Often, we're taught how to take care of patients. We remain altruistic, but often we put blinders on ourselves. If you imagine, the horse that's running with blinders, it only sees what's in front of him, and we ought to be able to remove the blinders and look to see what else is going on around. And if I was to go back and do this in a more structured manner, I would say probably dedicate no more than 5-7% of your time to truly understand other businesses and do so with an open mind, and understand that people are creating amazing value and doing a lot of good for humanity outside of medicine too. And you do not need to give up your core principles of doing the right thing, doing good by your community and by your family to necessarily be entrepreneurial.
When did you get your MBA? Was it right before this pause? When was that?
I think it was around 2004, 2005. Yeah. And fortunately, I got it in Chicago at Northwestern. At that time, it was the top-rated executive MBA program. 2 years of weekends, mainly Friday, Saturday, Sunday, essentially allowed me to again get an MBA, get an understanding of how business is run at a very high level, how value is created, how do you strategize, how do you market, how do you grow, how do you continue to sort of do so in a compliant manner, and essentially how do you create value for your community. That was an excellent bit of education, and while you don't always use it in your day-to-day medical practice, it really does give you a very refreshing perspective that we as doctors typically are not exposed to. We're told, in med school that it's all about patients and it's all about doing the right thing, etc., which it is. But at the end of the day, others are also creating value, and it's important for us to be able to stay open, stay engaged, be curious outside of our field. Otherwise, medicine itself can get stale, as you alluded to earlier.
So you got your MBA, you had these 3 businesses, you were then working for the Cleveland Clinic. I'm guessing that having that MBA was a significant part that allowed you to be a consultant for them, for their businesses that they were acquiring. And then eventually you just had your family come here, take care of those businesses, and then return back to a full-time interventional pain management position, correct?
That's right.
And that was in Florida. And eventually you went back to Wisconsin and you grew the business there. And tell us about then now your transition into Boston Scientific, because not everybody is going to be exposed to that. Those are positions that are very scarce, and they require a different set of skills that it seems that in your career you were just developing through the years. You were training yourself for that. Were you thinking long term that you would be in a position like this, or just out of curiosity eventually just naturally came to you?
So before going to Boston Scientific, I was working with a private equity firm. And the private equity model really is all about buy, build, sell. And essentially, these companies are trying to double their EBITDA every 3 to 5 years. They're highly leveraged.
Can you define EBITDA
Sure.
for the audience?
Yes, EBITDA is the earnings before interest, depreciation, amortization. So essentially, if you think about it, it's the revenues minus the expenses and what's left over before you pay taxes, profits, if you like. And a typical private equity firm buys a company, it leverages the business, so it may put 10-20% of the purchase price from its own pocket. The rest is borrowed from the bank. And every 3 to 5 years, they have to double the profits. And then they sell at a multiple of the EBITDA. It could be 5, 6, 7, 10 times the EBITDA, depending on the stability of the revenue stream, and depending on the margins and the competitive environment and so forth. But bottom line is they're very, very prudent, very strong in logistics, in supply chain, in terms of capacity utilization, bottlenecks, throughput. So all the operational bits are really well managed. And that's a different skill set completely to what was required in running a practice, as you yourself had been exposed to private equity. You know how that model works.
Can I stop you there?
Sure.
I'm gonna stop you there because I think I just jumped ahead of myself very quickly. Wanted to get to the Boston Scientific, but I agree with you that this is a very important part because as a physician, we see all the fees, reimbursement going down, right? And then you see more of these companies and private equity coming to acquire physicians and offices and practices. How does that model work so that you can explain it to the listener? You did some of it about, purchasing equipment and the marketing and all this stuff and acquiring more. But is that sustainable long term in the environment that we are? What's suffering on the other side? Which things are they cutting? Which things are they optimizing? So if you're a physician who wants to be private equity, because I think that one of the solutions long term for us as physicians might be that we become the private equity, and we understand that. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Sure.
How that process, as you say, is very different from just operating your own office. But how can physicians maybe become, like private equity themselves in a way where we still see the healthcare, the care part in healthcare at the beginning of a relationship with our patients?
So if you think about the broader context, let me help you frame this thing. So when I started interventional pain essentially had very large margins, and we were essentially selling experience, like Starbucks sells experience currently. So the cup of coffee is $4 or $5. And in that environment, you're looking for a rich experience. And essentially, that's what we want to do for our patients. But what's happened over the years is that the expenses for running a practice have gone up, the reimbursement's gone down. So instead of selling experience, now you're beginning to sell service, and then followed by a further contraction in your margins. So you're now selling a product, and then now, in my mind, the business of medicine really, and I call it the business of medicine because it's essentially that's what it is now. Is highly commoditized. So the margins are very, very slim. And so while you were selling an experience, the margins were high. There was a lot of inefficiencies that you could tolerate. In a commoditized business, it's all about efficiency, throughput, logistics, supply chain, and making sure that what you do is delivered in a very measured, structured way, so that you can at the end of the day, manage a business really, really efficiently. So use your resources optimally, and that's essentially what where we are now. And what private equity does is allows you to be able to manage your business in a very tight and efficient manner, where potentially you can reduce your overhead, or at least share it more universally amongst others. You can potentially overcome some of the barriers that you have if you have scale, with regards to contract, with regards to purchasing, with regards to staffing, and so forth. So private equity can create value, and can bring you some of the know-how that we typically would not have as physicians, to manage and operate a business much more efficiently. And so those were the skill sets that I actually must say that I learned during private equity tenure of almost 10 years. But that's very different to how you operate a major corporate business, where the focus really is on the very, very long term, 10, 15, 20 years out. You're looking out for a much more strategic approach to try and not only grow, but grow in a very measured way, so that it's very, very sustainable. Completely different skill sets, completely different cadence, completely different approach to private equity. So coming back to your question in terms of can physicians own private equity firms? Absolutely. As long as you have the skill sets to be able to operate efficiently, and be really, really strong operators, I think there's no reason why we cannot. And physicians should always be looking to improve their efficiencies anyway. But there are formal ways of going about doing this. Absolutely. There's nothing to stop physicians from operating private equity enterprises. These private equity companies are no different to any other human beings, and it's a skill set that if your audience wants to learn, it can go and acquire and learn. It's not the end of the world. I mean, nothing is that difficult or impossible. Physicians tend to be very smart, very competitive, and if they're open to learning, I absolutely feel that physicians can learn these skill sets and do so fairly quickly, and then run efficient businesses. I know several physicians.
Where do you think that knowledge could be gotten, like nowadays? Is it like more like through which type of mentor, business coaching, or experience would you recommend today, 2022, that a physician would be able to say, eventually become a private equity owner, investor, and all these things?
Yeah, I think 2 or 3 things, right? Number one, understand finances well. How do you get money, and how do you get cheap money? Number one. Number two, learn to evaluate these businesses to know that this business, it requires certain modes, certain protections. Learn to understand what the business's revenue stream is likely to be in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then what do you need to do to create a tighter revenue stream. And then most importantly, learn how to manage things efficiently, often through the use of technologies and so forth. And companies that do this sort of stuff well are companies that operate in the commodities business, companies that are good at supply chain logistics, the likes of Walmart, Costco, Dell Computing. These are companies that are really good at operating businesses, and so acquire those skill sets in order to be efficient. And there are lots and lots of good educational programs, both online as well as in person MBAs, that just basically give you basic project management skills and basic skills on operating businesses efficiently. So it's not something that's beyond any physician. Physicians tend to be, as I said, very competitive, very smart. If you can go through med school and then have the patience to go through residency and fellowship, there's no reason why you cannot acquire these skill sets. But be open to learning and dedicate, as I said, maybe 5-10% of your time every week specifically to build these skill sets. Have some, understanding that these businesses are creating value, and then just go and learn. There are lots and lots of people mentoring out there, people such as yourself. This is exactly why you are doing this podcast, as well as people like me. And there are lots and lots of other people who are willing to help people who want to be entrepreneurs, who want to be owners of private equity or other businesses grow. And we'll do it with pleasure.
That's awesome. That's what I'm telling people on this podcast, is that there's tons of physicians who are out there doing wonderful things like what you are, and they're willing to help. You just have to look for that company, get to know us and get to know them. And it's just the right moment, I think, for connecting and being able to get to the next step. And in medicine, I think that entrepreneurship is what's it's the tool that's gonna really save us as physicians and deliver the best care that we can still deliver for our patients. So we took the detour of the private equity. I'm gonna ask you, where would you like to go next right now?
Yeah, we can talk about large corporations and how they create value. And then more importantly, what can we learn from how they create value?
So let's talk about that transition then, because you had that transition, then you went for private equity, you were in Wisconsin doing this type of work, and then eventually you went to Boston Scientific. So the transition there, was this a position that you sought, a position that they offered? How does that happen? And how do you feel that you were ready already for this type of work?
So the way it happened for me was basically I was doing clinical research for patients and a practice in Wisconsin, and was involved in multiple different clinical trials. Many of them were industry-led, both pharma as well as medical devices. And a couple of medical device companies approached me, and a couple of the pharma business also approached me saying, we would love to have somebody come and help us with our growth, with our strategy, with our understanding of the physicians market. And initially, I was reluctant to do this, but then I met with the chief medical officer of Boston Scientific. He's a professor of cardiology from Sydney, and just the long-term intention that he had for each of the chief medical officers for each of the franchises that he had was very, very, very seductive and very attractive. Basically, his charter to the physicians that work under him is that you have to be the voice of the patient both inside and out, and use all of the employees and all the resources of Boston Scientific to do maximum good for humanity. And for someone like me, who's always been interested in promoting the field of interventional pain, specifically with decreasing the opioid burden in our communities, this was a perfect platform to be able to do two things. One, to improve the visibility of the interventional pain field. I genuinely believe that if a patient sees a trained pain physician early on in the pain journey, ideally before they are on opioids, that we would do maximum good for humanity, because we can often stop the patient ever getting on the opioid train. Number one. Number two, to decrease pain and suffering, I do not think that there is a better trained physician than an interventional pain doctor with fellowship training, beyond just talking about decreasing the opioid burden. And basically, Boston gave me the platform to be able to do this. And so it was a very natural transition for me to jump on this opportunity. And I've managed to also interview with a couple of other large companies that have similar visions in the pharma space. But I eventually chose Boston because it seemed like a better fit ethically and morally, and basically in terms of how can I use my skill sets to do what they want to do as well as do what I want to do.
So we talk about the first 90 days, right? And the 3 envelopes that the managers write when they're delivering for the next manager. Tell me about your first 90 days, how they went in the company at Boston Scientific.
I must say it was a little rough, not knowing. So going from a very structured life in taking care of patients, where typically I'd start at 6:30 in the morning, do my procedures until 11, and then see new patients until about 1 or 2, and then do the administrative stuff for the practice as well as for my position, which was essentially the chief medical officer at that time for this larger private equity firm. So that was a very structured life that I had, and to go from there to a very supportive role, which is what Boston Scientific's role was, and them not knowing exactly how I'm going to create value and what value I'm adding. The first 90 days were a little difficult. I have to admit. In fact, the first 6 months, I was wondering, what am I doing here? How am I actually going to create value, and what and can they perceive the value that I'm creating? So that was a very, very challenging time. Not really understanding exactly how the corporate environment functions. Corporations care more about very, very long term as opposed to private equity that's really worried about the next 3 years. So that transition was difficult. But I was basically assured by my chief medical officer, my boss, that it's going to work out, that this is a normal thing. Everybody goes through this, where the company is trying to figure out, how you are adding value, and you're trying to figure out exactly what needs to happen. But stay the course, continue to be the voice of the patient, both inside and out. Often you will upset people both inside and out, but that's your charter, that's your primary role, and luckily I had the patience to hang on in there for the first 90 days. So that was difficult. I have to say that.
So we have a few minutes left, and I want to talk about 3 specific tips for people who are wanting to go into that type of corporation long term. And the first ones is one, what other things you think you might have known, now that you know what it is, the first 90 days and 6 months, is there anything different that you would have done during that period of time, maybe in getting ready or during that period of time? And then any other 2 specific tips you might have for our audience that they can practice and go right away and do.
Absolutely, yeah. So the first one is understanding that teamwork is critical, right? Understand the roles of each of the corporate entities. So you've got business development, you've got strategy, you've got marketing, you've got HR, you've got sales and commercial teams, you've got clinical research, you've got regulatory. So if you want to go into a medical device or a pharma, understand the roles of each of these entities and how they fit into the big picture. So that's the first thing. Second thing is understand that that this role is going to be more of a supportive role. So you're supporting each of these entities, and probably spend a good 6 to 12 months speaking with the physicians who are vice presidents of companies and corporations in terms of exactly what they do, and seek the insights from people who have been there in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, as opposed to people who've been there for 20, 30 years, because the ones that have been there recently will be able to share those learnings, because they'll be more aligned to exactly what your needs are. So teamwork, number one, and understanding the roles of each of these different entities. Number 2, speak with a person who is educated and who is in that role, who's transitioned from your role to this particular role. And then the second thing is really, this is the third thing, I'm sorry, is to really understand that you will need to learn from others. It's a different set of skills and different set of cadence. An MBA will definitely help. and most of us can get those MBAs both online as well as in real person. That this is not about competition as much as it is about creating long-term value. Investors who invest in these large corporations are looking for very, very long-term value, 10, 20, 30 years, so that the mindset will have to be very, very different to what you have as a physician in private practice or physician in academia. Value creation is something that's done very differently compared to how we create value for patients and for communities.
Oh my goodness, Nilesh, that's been wonderful. Wonderful tips. It's you don't think, you're not taught, you're not really have anybody come to medical school to talk to us about these things. So thank you for spending the time today. Thanks for all that you do, because I know that I see you working. I see how you're not only the voice of Boston Scientific in neuromodulation, you're really the voice of us interventional pain physicians, and really true advocate for our patients in your day-to-day work. So thanks a lot for being here. Thanks a lot for your guidance, and I hope to see you soon.
Wonderful. And thank you, as always, enamored with your energy and your passion to educate and inform and reach out into each of the physicians and make them the very best that they can be. This has been your passion, and I wish you the very best with this podcast.
Thank you. I'll see you at the next meeting.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye. Well, guys, that's it for today. Stay tuned for more of our Design Your Physician Life podcast, which was brought to you by our Maxillary Mastermind, an exclusive mastermind for physician entrepreneurs. We'll continue to bring you useful resources to develop your physician entrepreneur life, like we did today with the amazing Dr. Nilesh Patel from Boston Scientific. Thank you for joining us. We hope you had a great time as we did. Stay in touch. Visit our website, maxillary.com. This is MAXALLURE. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. Give us 5 stars. Share the love. Share with your friends, your colleagues. See you later. Bye.
Please remember that Design is not providing specific financial, medical, or career advice. Our only intent is to stimulate your appetite for growth by sharing our experience and those of our speakers, coaches, and guests. Your personal growth and success will be unique to your circumstances and your hard work. We sincerely hope you enjoyed the show and look forward to seeing you next week.